Before we start, I just wanted to actually thank not just our speakers, but our very engaged audience. It's been an intense 2 days, and I think I speak for all of us here who've been engaged with numerous exhibition history conferences of our own making and of others. And I feel like that these 2 days have certainly enriched me and my own sort of knowledge and work. And I want to sort of thank you all for making that happen. And then I wanted to sort of bring things back to the overall idea and the sort of 3-year collaborative project with the Paul Mellon Center and Asiad Archive, and remind everybody of this idea of London, Asia. Think again about the title of this symposium, about exhibiting South Asia in Britain, and also reflect on the fact that if we are to sort of continue the metaphor of the exhibition and use that as a lens, we are treating Britain as a white cube, as that crystal palace that we keep sort of returning to, where South Asia is just coming in to be exhibited and to be consumed. And I want to challenge that. And I want to sort of remind us all, and it's maybe a formulation that is just appealing to myself and Sarah, and that's why we sort of started this thing, but to say that actually this idea of Britain it's a construct. And part of that construct is around, well, how do we negotiate, fight for, and I think that's important to state at the current climate, fight for what that Britain is and what it represents, has to be constructed. Earlier, and I hope David won't mind sharing, I was sort of pointing out to David that he's actually, it's not sufficient to say you're British English. Just like I'm British Pakistani, or people could be British Welsh or British Bulgarian. And therefore, when we exhibit South Asia, whatever shape it is, in Britain, what does that do to Britain? How do we expand our notion of what Britain is and what it can be? And is it just a stable geographical mass? So I wanted to just sort of leave that out there as my one sort of question and comment for us to think about, and then maybe sort of reflect further.
Comment. I feel like at some level I would like to... Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Thank you for disciplining me, as I've been doing to all of you. I wanted to reiterate Hamad's vote of thanks to all of you for being such an engaged and stimulating audience, and to also extend a very warm thanks to my co-organizers for being as collaborative as you have in putting this event together. To be honest, I feel like there are many questions that were generated from our collective discussions, formal and informal, over the last few days that haven't been fully addressed, questions that we began with. I'm thinking about Sharmini's remarks in the opening panel around value, patronage, infrastructure, which were to some extent echoed by Leon's closing remarks today, and that of course have been the focus of many informal discussions with some of you. So I thought that perhaps this might be an opportunity for us to reflect collectively on that opening and close. Another set of comments that seem to have been themes is just as Britain seems to be metaphor or myth in some ways in the way that we've been discussing these exhibitions. I think many of us have made interventions that suggest that the idea of South Asia too needs to be disentangled and disarticulated, that its collapse with India is problematic, and it's not just problematic politically, it's historically and analytically imprecise. There are moments when we are talking about South Asia as interpolated within a larger imperial network, and to sort of think through think retrospectively, I guess that's what it would be. Retrospectively and anachronistically about a nation state in the 19th century is somewhat problematic. I mean, what we're thinking about is a different kind of global circuit than the one that we are inhabiting today. But that perhaps my closing gambit, but it really is something that's been generated collectively, might be, how do we think about South Asia and Britain, and these are for me metaphors rather than nation states, ideas, in relation to the world, in relation to a global 19th century, a global 20th century, a global 21st century.
Well, I opened, I think, my remarks yesterday in the introductions talking a lot about collaboration. And I feel that this event has been enormously collaborative, and not just between us, but again, as Hamad and Sanal have said, with you. And it does strike me that exhibition histories are collaborative endeavours as well, that it is impossible for the sole researcher to cover all these nuances, bases of thinking about audiences, makers, these networks. So it really, for me, this has been a very kind of stimulating conversation, because together, you know, people are experts on very different things and have brought that to bear on our discussions, which I don't think, you know, you couldn't do alone on your own in a library, archive, wherever it might be. So for me, that's kind of brought a lot of energy, sometimes tensions, but always productive productive ideas to bear, and to put pressure on what we're doing and what we're doing through our collaboration. And, you know, we're very open to being pressed and pushed as we shape this project as well, and think about the potentials of this as an intellectual exercise as well. So I'm enormously grateful for you to kind of participating in this. And I think everyone in the room has said something, whether it's in the giving a paper, responding, or, you know, in the coffee breaks and lunchtimes as well. They're those spaces in which quite incredible things can happen, I think, between scholars. So I've really fed off the energy of that. So, and I also, I can't remember who said this, but someone described exhibitions as flashpoints. I think, Brenda, it might have been you. So forgive me if I've misattributed that. But I think that the idea of the flashpoint of an exhibition and its moment of time, and then its ripple effect outwards, what happens after. And sometimes I think some of these exhibitions, that effect or that impact, that impression, is not in its immediate, the days or weeks of its, after its immediate opening, but 10, 20, we've been talking about some exhibitions that are over 100 years old as well. So thinking, for me as well, across periods, the 1900 to now has been an incredibly interesting exercise to actually ask a very basic but very important question of why does this matter?
Thank you. I won't repeat the thanks other than to say that for me, it's been a really interesting few months in terms of working on South Asia and Britain, in terms of just how wide the community feels, and from being at Tate, which was initially a space of exclusion, to be within the institution, working not just on exhibitions but also on acquisitions and displays. You know, I really have this sense of this being a period of flux once again, and it's been really encouraging to be surrounded by colleagues that are worried about the same questions. I had written down a lot of things, but I'm going to abandon that, actually, to say that I have been thinking in these last 2 days about not just exhibition histories that were covered in the conference, but also the things that are sort of missing. And that's not just the slippages of how things are documented or not, or, you know, who's present and what may have come up in the call for papers, but also thinking about, you know, the exhibition itself as a sort of laboratory, a site for experimentation. Perhaps if exhibitions to date have been object-driven, as we were talking about, the juxtapositions or curatorial decisions that are made on site in the space, perhaps those are things that actually do have to be experienced. Perhaps you just have to be there. It's been really interesting to see people present on works by curators who are in this room. It's almost as if, and the question that kept coming up was, did you talk to them? I mean, they're here, they're alive. Did you talk to them about the exhibition? Right? No, I mean, for me, it's too early. And I'm going to going on from this term of laboratory experiment forensics, and what we're doing right now, the word post-mortem is stuck in my head. I'm sorry, I don't want to end on a morbid sort of note, but and I don't know if that's even useful, but that thing of, you know, going and collecting evidence and then having a sort of an opportunity to maybe even look back at your own work. I think it is something that we maybe are doing, at least in this field, you know, for the first time. I'm not quite ready. I was going to initially talk about the experience of having worked on a South Asian exhibition as somebody who's from the region. A lot of people in this room opened those doors. Geeta spoke about sitting at the same table, and those doors were kept open for people like me. I mean, just the, you know, people keep telling me, you're so privileged, you have such a great job, and it's true. I'm doubly privileged because as a Pakistani, I got to work on an exhibition of a major Indian artist. That's not something one can take for granted at all, being South Asian. I mean, we say South Asia as if it's a easy place to move around in. It's not. It's an easy place to move around in if you're British, you know. So I think there's still a lot of kind of difficulties that we need to be more open about, rather than sort of celebrating the achievements that have already happened.
Yeah, maybe we've got a few minutes. Again, I don't want to preempt, but I'm sure there are some comments, so we'll just end by opening it up to the floor.
I found the whole, you know, conference symposium to be very rewarding. I just wanted to say a couple of words on, you know, the theme of this came up, whether exhibition histories is a kind of a discrete, let's say, intellectual field of inquiry, et cetera, you know. And of course, you know, in one sense, one can say that that is it a subset of art history, or I don't know, intellectual history or history proper or whatever. It doesn't, anyway, these labels, we all know that, you know, these are partial, et cetera, et cetera. But I think what exhibition histories does for me is that it kind of lays, at some level, of course, it can have its own, you know, the fruits of its research can have its own kind of, let's say, worth. But for me, they're also, they provide a kind of a preamble, if you will, to then think about, you know, further questions. For example, the objects or the practices that were in these exhibitions, what happened to those trajectories? How were they received individually or perhaps in other exhibitions? In other words, there may be ways to kind of, in a sense, build on the knowledge of, you know, what we might term exhibition histories into further, you know, into other kinds of, you know, inquiries that, so I don't see as exhibition histories as standing alone on its own, but is really part of a larger field of inquiry. There's also other ways to think about exhibition histories which might have to do with issues of, let's say, phenomenology and thinking about, you know, even the layout of the exhibition, which there was not much attention. You know, there were only one paper, I think, which looked really at the layout of the exhibition, you know, and perhaps there might be ways to, there are other ways and other questions even to ask of, let's say, exhibition histories. There's a good book by Pamela Smart, which looks at the Menil collection through this kind of a phenomenological kind of, you know, and that's an example of a very different kind of exhibition history, perhaps, okay? And the third thing is the anxiety regarding canonization, which I would argue that any time you work on something, you are, you know, potentially contributing to canonization, and I don't see that as a problem. I don't worry about that, okay? So for me, the question of canonization, it's not a question for me. I don't worry about that problem. It's not a problem for me, okay?
So bringing things back to the originary source, I bring in the I as in A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I. I as a site where all other I's come and cut across each other. Emma Goldman has this famous saying, if I can't dance, am I part of your revolution? So here I'm thinking, you know, British art, British artist, does having a very intimate relationship with a country qualify you to be part of that system? If all your years of actually coming to, you know, become an artist is part of it, does that count? Can one only be seen within the feminist discourse, inside it or outside it? Modernism, not modernism, postmodernism, all the things that have been discussed. So I would like to then say, not if I can't dance, am I part of your revolution? But if I don't dance, is it my revolution?
I will, taking actually, when Sonia was talking about the eye, I was actually thinking about it in visual terms, and I was actually thinking if you put it horizontally, what does that actually give us? And part of this goes to this idea of the hyphenated identities, that, you know, when you talk about thinking about South Asia and Britain, when you're talking about figures like were discussed in the last panel, individuals that do exist in multiple places are displaced, as you know. So that this ambivalence towards place and fixity, and how is there something productive to actually think about the ephemerality of exhibitions in being able to address this slippery identity form as well, and in doing that, in these dislocated places, can looking at histories and perhaps also thinking forward in terms of exhibition histories, can we look at that opportunity imaginatively in some ways as well? So just putting that out there to think about how many hyphens. I mean, is the hyphen, do you tilt it on the side and make it a slash, or, you know, how are these productive ways of contending with, you know, enmeshed and complicated identities?
This is not a question, this is an echo. I just wanted to pick up on the fact that yesterday Hamad's question about language wasn't really picked up, which to me, being new here, was wildly surprising. And so I wonder what would be added if we think about all of this stuff in terms of English not being the only language of Britain and English not being the only language of South Asia.
Well, thank you. I've learnt a lot over these past 2 days, and it's been very stimulating, and met new and fascinating people. So thank you. Exhibition histories, I mean, institutions and people make exhibitions. And I think one can't just stop at the exhibition itself. One has to look at the institutions. And thank God they're spread all over Great Britain, not just in London. And I think that's important. And what do these institutions represent? I mean, in the penultimate talk, we saw these very small galleries which hardly lasting for 1 or 2 years, and then other institutions which still go on, I mean, like the Tate or other places. And there was an institution no one has mentioned, which was quite deeply involved with South Asia and other parts of the so-called non-Western world, which is Innova. Why did Innova fail? I mean, we have to come up to the present, I think. Why did Innova fail? And why did the Tate make an exhibition called The World Goes Pop? Why did they attribute a Western nomenclature to artists and regions which frankly don't acknowledge that nomenclature? This is now. So, I mean, I think that when one looks at the institutions, I'm not doing this to complain at all, but I mean, one looks past actually to learn something, both about the past and the present and oneself. And it has to be a continuous process. And so I'm just really arguing that we don't only fetishize the exhibition, nor the canon, and I agree, and don't give a toss about the canon either. That actually we think about the institutions and what they represent, who they speak to, and the language they use, languages they use. So that's just a kind of plea.
Shall I sort of quickly pick up a couple of things? Firstly, on the exhibition, I think it was Saloni who introduced the word excess, and over the last few months I've been toying with this idea of art histories of excess. And I'm not going to go into details, but one of that idea is how do we exceed biographies, which art historians do and they understand, objects, which also they do and understand, and move into areas where art history is less comfortable. Yeah? The art school, exhibition, because it does exceed these tools. It's more than, it is about the finance, it is about the politics. And I would argue that art history doesn't deal with that very well, or these tools have not yet been found. And perhaps the exhibition is that moment of excess, which puts the tools and methodologies of art history into a little bit of a crisis. And for that, I mean, we were talking about case studies and the law school case study. I would actually compare the exhibition history to the business school case study. Yeah? Because the law school case study suggests that you're adding something and this will be contested and whatever, where the business school case study is just about, did it fail, did it succeed? And I think that's a closer comparison for the exhibition.
Can I just say something? Because in terms of the curriculum, right, the art curriculum in British sort of art schools is still very Eurocentric, right? I'm from Manchester Metropolitan University, and our curriculum is very Eurocentric. So that's
this is not just the problem in Manchester. The last two hires in Hong Kong were a Renaissance and a Baroque specialists. So this is actually also a general problem of the discipline of art history itself, one that it's struggling with, how does it do the world, And I think that's a live issue, but that's a different conference. Yeah. So let's not go there. One question on language, and I was also just thinking about, or one response, is if we think about, say, we've been looking at artists. Now let's switch genre. If I say Salman Rushdie to you, or Hanif Qureshi, how is the reaction different to if I say Sousa, Chandra, or Shamsa? Yeah? What is it about literature that allows Salman Rushdie and Hanif Qureshi to be British writers or novelists that somehow prevents Sousa or Chandra? I mean, Sousa still being, that slippage that Alice, mentioned, I think is actually quite vast. And perhaps how we deal with language is kind of important. And it's important not just here, but also within South Asia. Because I think unless we actually look that problem of language straight in the eye, I think we're not going to decolonize our own art histories.
So since we're returning to questions, I'd like to return to Sonal's suggestion about Shahid Amin's problematization of the event. And in order to worry a little bit about exhibition histories, perhaps not really necessarily grappling enough with, or let's put it this way, putting a bit too much of a burden on the exhibition as an event. So you end up, one of the things that I've noticed in a lot of the presentations is that you have this sort of moment where you realize the reviews are not actually reviewing the work, or that they're not really addressing the event, and there's this way where actually, yes, in history writing in general, we always have this problem with the misrecognition of the event in the newspaper record. I mean, meaning this work, people who brought up, I forget who brought up Ranajit Guha, but let's go back to Ranajit Guha and think about the sort of the writing of history. And then we can find the tools, Ahmad, that would perhaps allow us to have a broader sense of the exhibition starting 3-4 years before it happens. This kind of long history of exhibitions as events, as productions, really. On the question of language and the difference between books and art, right? It's not just a language thing, it's also the eventness of the presentation, the public presentation of art, as opposed to the long sort of presence of books on people's shelves. And I would say that the form of art versus the form of writing really has a lot to do with our different apprehension of Salman Rushdie and Hanif Qureshi to our different apprehension of Shamsa and Sousa. They're not available in the same way. Hamad never buys anything I say. Do you notice this? Anyway.
That's one for the pub.
Well, until he rediscovered his Indianness, and Sorry, one question of David got unanswered. Actually, two questions. One is the world goes pop, and I'm looking at you now. I don't know if you want to take that on.
I also worked at Innova, so I'm sure there's something in a contract that I signed somewhere that says I can't say what I really would. I guess I think we all of us who have lived and worked in London, and I came to this party a bit late. I only arrived here in 2005-06, and I guess worked at Innova a bit later on before I came to Tate. And at Innova, it was clear that that there was no link to a kind of audience that really belonged to the organization. Not just in terms of the Arts Council needing audience figures, but the fact that there was no demographic or community or, some kind of natural constituency where, either for the space in which it was located, but also for the people working within the organization. And so there was this idea that there was this archive that existed and a resource that was available, but actually, in terms of what the space represented to Black or non-Western artists based in London, it seemed to have kind of lost its relationship to them, which is the reason that it was brought into being. And also in trying to be critical and reaching out to the rest of the world once every other institution started doing that. I mean, you guys probably already know this. It kind of lost its relevance. So, maybe it had a shelf life. In terms of World Goes Pop and these kind of genre-based exhibitions, I think, that is something that the institution thinks about in terms of its own collection, its own definitions, but also expanding or complicating those definitions. I think one of the problems with the show was exactly that it was trying to go beyond and redefine, but it was stuck with that category. And that's not just a question for pop. It's really, people keep saying you have to rewrite the glossary, but then do you abandon all of the terms, or do you bring in terms in different languages? Probably we'll need to do all of those things in terms of methodology, but you have to still kind of, in order to break something down, you have to identify it. And I think with, when I was going to mention this earlier, for instance, that Wendt is on display in a room on international surrealism at the moment. And he's there kind of in place of Man Ray, because the works being shown are experimental solarization pictures between Claude Cahun and Magritte, and there's Picasso and Ernst and Bourgeois in that room. So, there is a definite play going on, but I don't think it's resolved, and I don't think it needs to be.
Just very quickly, thinking about nation states, I think it's worth thinking about when nation states actually do impact what gets shown in terms of visa issues, also sort of tax, like shipping situations, when actually they do play a massive role in what we get shown.
Not only in terms of exhibitions, but conferences as well. Enormous energy by a lot of people in this room to get here by making those applications to be together. So it kind of extends into different arenas as well.
There's been a lot of talk about what South Asia means and what it includes and so on. And I thought at the same time, you will want to consider what Britain is. I found in my own work that in the very beginning of the 20th century, that there was something I called an Anglo-Indian art world with capitals in Calcutta, Bombay, and London. And there was circulation among that. And the artists who were in India were also responding to and having some kind of impact on an art world that extended from Britain and India to Britain in the British Isles. So just, keep that whole arena in play.
Hi, thank you. It's just interesting that Iftikhar just mentioned Anish Kapoor. And of course, those of you who watched the Olympic Games would have seen the SLR Metal Tower on the news night after night. And of course, Mittal must have sponsored some of, and considering the steel industry's difficulties in this country at the moment, and of course, you know, the tower worked as international soft diplomacy. But what intrigued, you know, many people was that so many people saw this artwork who maybe never went into an art gallery, don't even look at art consciously, and yet the work itself is affecting them. So maybe, you know, following on from what somebody said, we should look at artwork and then extrapolate outwards sometimes, as we all do, rather than the other way around sometimes. Okay, thanks.
Can I just say, tomorrow there is a panel about Reubenkaka with some of the participants at the conference here, with Geeta Kapoor, Sonal Kolar, Karan Zitzowitz, and Deepak Anand, moderated by Krista Kaur, the co-curator of the exhibition. And I'm hoping that, I mean, it'll be more specific, but some of these conversations will continue there. So I hope to see you at Tate tomorrow afternoon.
Great. So I think we are, given the time, we're going to wrap up the 2 days of the symposium. But again, as Nada says, I hope to see many of you tomorrow. I just want to say a very quick thanks. Helena and John, who have been recording the event very unobtrusively and have not got in any of our ways. So thank you to you both for making an excellent record.
And can we also have a very big round of applause to Ella, Harriet, and everyone who helped with it. Thank you.
So thank you to you all, and go safely, and please keep in touch with us. I'll email you all when we have a recording, and we'll keep in touch with the group as well. Thank you ever so much for all your participation. It's been a really fabulous few days.